So this week we're going to be talking about how to complete a literature review. So your reading in chapter 3 discussed how to search for sources and then how to put them together to compose a comprehensive literature review for your thesis. So first, why do you have to do a literature review? The first reason is it defines the context of your research. So it gives you some answers to some of these questions of what has been done before, what kinds of studies, what kinds of methods were done in your field, in your particular area of interest before the work that you're doing. So that way it kind of contextualizes the work that you're doing for your thesis. It also provides what's called a theoretical framework, so a lens through which your study can be viewed. Now, again, theoretical frameworks are different depending on the type of study that you do. So if your questions tend to be more quantitative in nature, then you probably will end up doing a framework that discusses objectivity in research. However, if you're a qualitative researcher, you tend to believe that all research is subjective. So very, very different philosophical stances towards the research itself, and then also kind of informs the way that you conduct your study. So typically in a qualitative study, a researcher will describe their own biases or their own experiences, prior to doing the study so that, there's a context there for that. Whereas a quantitative researcher might, as we talked about last week, describe their predictions or their ideas about a certain effect or a certain relationship between variables. So again, very, very different philosophies, but if you decide to want to include a sort of a framework to situate your research, we can talk a little bit about that. I think a few of you have already kind of indicated that you're interested in doing more constructivist research, for instance, or more behaviorist research. So based off of that, we can kind of talk about what your framework might be for that. These literature reviews can also be used to demonstrate the validity of a particular type of methodology or assessment. So, what have other people studied and how have they studied it before? And then for this class, probably because you have to. So creating a lit review for your research proposal is a good way to sort of start to understand the research in your field or area of interest, and will carry you forward as you go through your master's program. Now, one of the things that we were working on this past week was your research questions. So one of the things I noticed about most of you is that you were trying to take on a little too much. Remember that your master's thesis is not a way to revolutionize the field necessarily, but to contribute to what existing knowledge is there in your particular area. So a lot of you had, like 3 or 4 research questions, and it might be useful to narrow that down to 1 or 2 main areas of interest. Remember, your research question isn't set up so that you can do it all. It's set up so that you can find a particular narrow area of research that you are interested in. So if you review the comments that I provided on the majority of your purpose statements and research questions, you'll see that for a lot of you, I helped you to sort of pare down your questions. Now, before you can start doing your lit review, you should have an idea of some sort of question or questions in mind. So now that you can start to state your questions, you can start to look at the keywords that make up these questions. The literature review in this way also tells you what other people have done to answer these or very similar questions. Now, at least to get started, you want to look based on your research questions, as I said. You want to find articles and not the ones where they're conceptual or theoretical, but really try to focus on articles that cite themselves as empirical research. Now, what do I mean by empirical research? I mean ones where there is data that is gathered and analyzed. So they're actually conducting a full-on study. So they're looking at a particular set of participants for the study, and they're analyzing the data that they collect. So these are called empirical research articles. You also want to make sure, like I said last week, that they are peer reviewed. So peer-reviewed articles are ones in which there has been a whole lot of scrutiny and, editing and also critique before the article gets published. So those are the articles that you're going to be looking for your 5 annotated sources this week. You may want to also use books, but these can be more for some general reference and to gain some ideas. So the books are really a good way to frame your research, so they might be good for an introduction section as opposed to a literature review. So with the literature review, and for your assignment for this week, it is really important that you look for peer-reviewed empirical articles. Now, like we started talking about last week when I kind of went over parts of your article critique, you're going to be looking for articles in the database, which is ERIC, Educational Resources Information Center. Now, you can also look in EBSCOhost. So those are the 2 that I demoed for you in the article critique. Now, remember that this is where you're looking for your research articles. This is not how you analyze your data. This is not how you collect your data. This is simply a way to find peer-reviewed empirical articles for your literature review. So ERIC will contain things like the abstract or the summaries of the articles. It may contain conference presentations, research reports, and these empirical articles that are supported and peer reviewed. But it can also contain articles that may not be as reliable as others. So you'll get a variety. And really it is important, as I kind of showed you last week, that you can select the peer-reviewed empirical articles in your searches for these articles. So you can start to go through the abstracts of articles to kind of get a sense of whether the article would be a good fit for your literature review based on the questions that you have. Now for you, you can use ERIC and you can use the library website to access ERIC. Again, all you need to do is log in with your ID and you can go ahead and search the databases that we have available through our CSUDH library. You can also use Google Scholar as long as you make sure to filter the results by peer-reviewed articles. And remember that Google Scholar is not always going to give you the most up-to-date findings, so make sure that you set up your time period, so the years that you're interested in looking at from 2014 say to 2016, so you get the most current research in your area. So these are some of the ways in which you can find articles. And as I said in our Mendeley presentation, you can also use Mendeley to get you started and find, a list of some of the articles that you might need to find full text versions of. So like last week, here again is a snapshot of what EBSCOhost looks like. This is another research database. So if you look at the snapshot here, you can see that you can actually go in and type a particular keyword, and then you can select the field as is highlighted here. You can select by keyword, by author, so there's different ways of you doing your search. And here there's a checkbox, if you notice, that says full text. So it's nice if you can get the full text version of the article so you have the entire article available to you and you can go ahead and read it. So that's kind of what you're looking for. You can also choose, any journals in particular that publish the type of work you're interested in. You can set it up by date. So if you're looking for articles that are, from 2014 to 2016, say, you can put that in there. You can show articles, that are available in paper copy only. You have a variety of ways that you can sort of filter your search. One thing that I would recommend to you strongly is to look for the most current research in your area. So try to find articles between at least 2010 to 2016 so that you're getting the most current, most up-to-date research in your particular area. Now, one thing that you can do is you can actually go ahead and browse other journals related to your research question. So you can actually look at articles that are talking about your particular subject, and you can go ahead from there and look at the reference section of those articles, and that might lead you to some more articles. So if you're having trouble just finding 5 articles by doing a general search using ERIC, you can actually look through the references section of an article that you find that does match your criteria. You can look through a particular journal that publishes work in your area of expertise. So those are some ways to kind of get you started so that you can definitely find 5 articles. Now, I've read through all of your research questions and purpose statements, and I'm pretty sure that you can all find 5 articles that are related to your topic. If you're having trouble with this, please go ahead and send me an email so I know that I can help you to find some additional articles that might fit that criteria. So as I was saying before, the web in general is not a good source for scholarly articles. While you can use things like Google Scholar, you are, kind of advised to use ERIC or EBSCOhost before you go just kind of browsing the internet. Just like I was saying to some of you in your purpose statements and research questions, try not to use internet sources for your writing for the research proposal. That sometimes reads as not as scholarly, and it also borders sometimes on plagiarism. So you don't want to end up in that category. You definitely want to keep your articles peer-reviewed, empirical, and sort of avoid some of the web-based information which can be outdated or incorrect. So just keep that in mind as well. So if you think about these helpful hints here, you can write down information needed for the citations in case you need to find articles again. You can also use the reference manager, Mendeley, that I suggested so that you have this stored somewhere. You can use files in your personal computer. You can use note cards, and you can also look in the reference sections, as I said. So if you see, somebody who's cited many times, this can also be a good indicator that that person must be important. Now, after you read a couple of articles, you're going to start to see some patterns emerge. These will be with some of the general and specific topics that you're looking at. You may have, planned for some of these topics, but some are just going to kind of come up and you're like, I never thought of this particular aspect of this area. So, if I'm doing a research study on culturally relevant pedagogy, maybe I didn't think to look for, second language learners, or I didn't think about, their discussion of 0.5 generation student experiences. And maybe that becomes a theme in my literature review. So these are some things that will come up as you're reading some of the articles. And that's why we're doing the annotated sources first, is to get you guys thinking about some of these patterns. It's a great way for you to take some general notes and get yourself familiar with the literature before you dive into writing a lit review just like that. So, take this assignment seriously and make sure that you do a good job with this. Summarize your articles, give me some of those meaty details like the number of participants and the methodology that they used, because that'll help you to form some of the patterns that you need to create your lit review. So this is kind of what the organization can look like. So first you start with some broad topics. So, your overall big topic might be, behavior and autism, right? So those are pretty broad topics. So you might have some sentences about, like how children with autism tend to display challenging behaviors, for instance, right? And then you might have subtopics. Well, in this one particular group of students that, has been worked with, they tend to display, these particular challenging behaviors. So, headbanging or flapping. These are some of the behaviors that have come up for students with autism, right? And then your study may be looking at, one specific behavior that is challenging. So you may be looking at, throwing things, for instance, right? So then you look at studies that say, okay, so the previous research has shown that, certain students with autism will throw things when they're provoked by other peers or something like that. And then from there, you take it into your own research question. So another example here with the themes, you may have, something like, a CAI program has been shown to be effective in enhancing learning, and then you'll need articles that support this statement with evidence from the research articles that you find. So, you can say that that's the case, but you have to prove it as well. Now, once you guys have created your annotated summaries and you've done quite a bit of searching, you'll have to begin the writing process. So it's a good idea to start by drafting something. Like any paper, a lit review has like an introduction, a body, and a summary, and it gives the readers first a preview of what they're going to see in the overall study, and you sort of using that review of the research to give them a context and also sort of a review of what's to come in your actual thesis. Now, in the body of the lit review, you're going to have some major themes, as I said before, and you may wish to make, or at least some articles, have them as supporting evidence of a particular theme. So like I said, for my example, right, so if I was doing a study on culturally relevant instruction and I was looking at this theme of the 0.5 generation, then you might want to include, that as the header, 0.5 generation, but then underneath it, you may want to write a little bit about a couple of the articles that talked about 0.5 generation and cite them. So these themes or points then become sections within the body of the paper. And then you write, an introduction to that particular theme as well as a summary of it, after the body. So the summary sort of like wraps everything up at the end. So as the visual showed before, you can use that funnel to organize the sequence of the body. The broader topics are first, then the subtopics, and then finally any research that's very close to yours at the end. Remember, you're not just reporting the results of the studies. You're trying to interpret or make some points related to the study as backed up by other research. So you're trying to embed, your own work as well as their work together. There's like this merging process that happens. So you're not just necessarily spouting out everything that they said. You got to put in your interpretation of what was said too. So I like to organize my paragraphs as follows. You start with, the theme, right? And then under the theme, you write down, a couple sentences that explains what it is, provide a couple of examples from the literature that you looked at. So you might put in, 0.5 generation, then such and such said that 0.5 generation is a critical piece. Then another study said that while this is true, this is also, another aspect of the ELL population that we're having to deal with. And so they both kind of talk about this 0.5 generation. And then underneath that, you write, therefore, it is interesting that the 0.5 generation is an important piece of this because. And then you're kind of providing your own interpretation of these two studies and also this theme that you created. Now, here are some things you don't want to put in your lit review. You want to leave out your personal opinions, okay? So if you make a statement, don't use your first person, I feel that this, okay? No I's or me. Leave that out of your lit review. If you're a qualitative researcher, you may have an opportunity to put that in later sections of your research, but for now, avoid I and my and personal pronouns as much as possible. Don't use a lot of quotes either. Try to do what's called paraphrasing, right? A lot of you tended to rely on quotes, and while that is also helpful to kind of get the message across, now it's time to break down those quotes and think about what this means in your own voice, okay? If you use a quote, just remember you are including page numbers with the citation. That's where you use quotations. That's where you use page numbers in that particular instance. Now, if you finish a little bit early with the lit review section, remember it's not due this week, but the week after. You can have somebody else look at your lit review. There are several options for you for this. So the first is you can have me look at it. I'm happy to, if you want to send me a draft a little early. Remember, it's just a shortened lit review, just like 5 pages. So remember, you can also have me look at it before you actually turn it in. And I can give you information about clarity or flow or how complete it feels. I'm happy to do that. The best way, if you want to send it to me, is to just send me by email, and I can send it back to you by like Google Docs with some edits. Um, you can also go to the Graduate Writing Center, which is located in the library. And I'll provide a link for that on our website in case it's not mentioned. But you can go there and somebody will sit down with you and actually go through your lit review with you if you have questions about it or if you just want another pair of eyes on your lit review. So it's a good idea to get written feedback from others so that you're not just turning in something that only you have read. The editing process is a big part of the research process. Everybody does it. Even if I'm just writing a paper by myself for publication, I always make sure to go ahead and get another couple of people to look at it before I submit it. It's just part of the research process, and it makes things a little bit easier when you submit your final draft. Now, there are citation formatting rules. Now, most of you know about APA and can use that. If you do not have access to the book, the 6th edition of the APA guide or the manual, then you can go on the Purdue OWL site that I provided you guys last week. That's a good one to use. There are also handouts available from the library that you can use as well. So these are some of the places where you can find that information. But it is expected that because you're in education, you're using the APA format for your writing. So that includes any time that you're using sources, you're providing the in-text citation, so citing within the body, as well as the reference list at the end. Okay, and some of you have been doing this pretty consistently, which is great. But for those who haven't really worked a lot with this, it's time to start making sure that you include this. I will be paying particular attention in your lit review to the fact that you have, properly cited your sources, okay? Now here's some things about a good lit review, right? First, we know that it includes articles from the last 5 to 10 years. Just like I mentioned to you, you want maybe from 2010 to 2016. You can go a little older, maybe 2006, but try to keep it as recent as possible, okay? Some major findings can be included from older sources. You may see like a signature person in the field who has written about your topic. So, for behavior and autism, there's Rob Horner is like a major player in the field. So you might go back, when you introduce things to like talk a little bit about his work, even though his work is a little bit more dated. Some of it is a little bit more dated, right? If you're doing work in, like the retention of teachers, which is one of my research areas, Bonnie Billingsley is one of the signature people in our fields, but she writes articles that, sometimes date back to the 90s. So, if there are significant pieces that like seem to pop up over and over again, like you see the same citation pop up quite a bit, you can definitely use them, but just don't rely only on older sources. So try to make sure that you're also incorporating some more recent articles that are coming into play. So make sure that you contain sufficient references. So for this particular class, we're only doing 5 articles, but as you go forward in your program, you're going to say, that at least 15 sources are ones that you're going to need for your overall lit review once you've finished your thesis. So that's really a good indication of if you've been more thorough in the literature. The next piece is obviously, something that you want to look at or have other people look at is logical flow. Are you using the correct APA headings? Are you showing, sort of a mapping or a flow between sections of your lit review? And did you include citations for any statement that, can be considered an opinion? This is important. I think a lot of people miss this part. I think when I was reading through some purpose statements, there were some statements that people were making, but there was no research to cite it. So especially if you say something like, oh, the research shows that, inclusive PE is really good for students with disabilities. Well, that's great, but which research? You have to make sure that you cite it for me, okay? So just make sure that anytime you make those types of statements that you have something to back it up with. And lastly, for those of you who are new, there is a website for the thesis. This is one helpful link that Dr. Fisher in our department has. And I'll also put up for you what I use with some of my special education master's students, which is it's a graduate handbook for the Department of Education, as well as some resources for grad students in CSUDH. So this will sort of help you with any of the formatting issues or any of the requirements for the thesis overall. So especially if you're new, it might be worth checking out a couple of these resources just to kind of get yourself familiarized with, what's available to you.